The heat was a physical weight, pressing down from a merciless sky the color of bleached bone. It settled in the lungs, a fine red grit that coated the tongue and turned every swallow to dust. For 3 days the wagon had carved a slow, groaning path through this emptiness, and Lin Wei had watched the world she knew dissolve behind her into a shimmering haze. She was 18. The letter in the sleeve of her plain white prairie dress, the one that had sealed her fate, felt brittle as a dead leaf. It promised a husband, a new life. It had not promised this. This was the edge of the world, a place where the sun came to die. The driver, a man whose face was a road map of sun cracks and tobacco stains, finally pulled the mules to a halt. "This is it." Lin Wei followed his gaze. It was not a ranch. It was a wound on the land. A collection of sun-bleached planks huddled together against a low, stony ridge, looking as if the next strong wind would carry it away like chaff. The corral held nothing but dust. The water trough was warped and split. A single skeletal tree clawed at the sky beside the shack, its branches bare and twisted in a permanent agony. This was not the home of a man who could afford a bride from across the ocean. This was the home of a man who had nothing left to lose. She did not cry. She had packed her tears away with her silk slippers and jade combs, things that had no place here. She clutched the small cloth-wrapped bundle that held all she owned and slid from the wagon, her feet landing in the soft, deep dust with a soundless puff. The driver grunted, tossed her bundle onto the ground, and turned the wagon without another word. The creak of the wheels faded, leaving a silence so profound it rang in her ears. A shadow moved in the dark slash of the shack's open doorway. It was a man, or the outline of one, leaning heavily against the frame. He was a silhouette against the gloom within, tall but stooped, his form indistinct and wavering in the oppressive heat. He did not step out to greet her. He did not speak. He simply stood there, watching her, a pillar of darkness in a world bleached by light. This, then, was the man, the reason she had crossed an ocean only to find herself stranded in a sea of dust. She took a breath, the air searing her throat, and began the long, slow walk toward the shack, toward the silence, toward the life that was now hers. The smell hit her first, a heavy blanket of stale air, sweat, dust, and the metallic tang of old blood. It clung to the shadows that filled the single room of the shack, a space cluttered with the debris of neglect. A rough-hewn table held a dirty plate and a tin cup. A cast-iron stove stood cold in the corner, a fine layer of rust blooming on its surface. The floor was packed earth, uneven and dark, but her eyes were drawn to the cot in a far corner, to the man who now lay upon it, his breathing a shallow, ragged sound in the suffocating quiet. He had retreated from the doorway as she approached, his movements slow and pained. Now, in the dim light filtering through the grimy window pane, she could see him properly. He was younger than she had expected, his face sharp with high cheekbones and a strong jaw, but it was drawn and pale beneath a dark stubble. A thick bandage, stained a dark, rusty brown, was wrapped around his chest and shoulder. His shirt was open, revealing skin slick with the sheen of fever. His eyes were open, watching her. They were a startlingly pale gray, the color of a winter storm, and they held no welcome, only a flat, assessing exhaustion. "You are the one?" His voice was a dry rasp, barely more than a whisper. Lin Wei gave a single, small nod. Words felt too large for this space, too brittle. She set her bundle down by the door, her movements deliberate and quiet. Her mind, which had been a maelstrom of fear and disappointment on the long walk from the wagon, was now strangely calm. This was the reality. A sick man in a broken-down shack. The test was not to endure it, but to act. She scanned the room, her gaze cataloging the immediate needs: water, clean cloths, food. There was a bucket by the door, empty. She picked it up without a word and stepped back out into the blinding sun, her eyes searching for a well. She found it behind the shack, a stone-lined hole with a creaking winch. The rope was frayed, the bucket leaky, but the water at the bottom was dark and cool. It took all her strength to haul it up, the handle biting into her soft palms. She did not rest. Back inside, she found a tin basin and poured some of the precious water into it. She tore a strip from one of the spare chemises in her bundle, ignoring the small pang of loss for the fine-spun cotton. The man on the cot watched her every move, his gray eyes following her as she dipped the cloth, wrung it out, and approached his side. He flinched when she reached for his forehead, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. She paused, her hand hovering in the air. Her gaze met his, steady and unblinking. She was not asking for permission. She was stating a fact. He needed care. She was here to provide it. After a long, silent moment, the tension eased from his shoulders, a quiet surrender. She gently laid the cool, damp cloth across his brow. He closed his eyes, a faint sigh escaping his lips. The test had begun. The days settled into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the man's fever. Lin Wei rose before dawn, the air still holding a remnant of night's coolness. She would fetch water, her hands already beginning to toughen and callous from the rough rope of the well. She would coax a small fire to life in the rusty stove, making a thin broth from the sack of dried beans and smoked salt pork she found in a small pantry. The food was meager, but she made it last, her portions small, ensuring he ate the most. She did not complain. She did not sigh. She worked. Her world shrank to the confines of the dusty yard and the single stifling room. She learned the landscape of the man's illness. She cleaned his wound as he instructed in clipped, terse phrases, her stomach clenching at the sight of the angry, puckered flesh around the crude stitches, but her hands remained steady. She learned the sound of his breathing, the subtle shift that signaled a rise in his fever, the deeper cadence that meant he was finally in a true healing sleep. He was Nathaniel Blackwood, she learned, not because he introduced himself, but because she found a worn, leather-bound book with his name inscribed on the inside cover. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was to issue a quiet command or ask a practical question. More water. The fire. Did you bolt the door? He watched her constantly. From the cot, his gray eyes tracked her movements as she swept the packed earth floor, as she mended his torn shirt with neat, precise stitches, as she sat in the doorway in the evenings, staring out at the vast, bruised purple of the twilight sky. He was watching for a crack in her composure, a moment of weakness or despair. He was waiting for the tears, for the recriminations, for the inevitable collapse of the delicate-looking girl who had been sent to this desolate place. He saw none of it. Lin Wei moved with a quiet efficiency that was its own form of defiance. She was not serving him out of fear or even duty. She was surviving, and he was part of that survival. Her resilience was not loud. It was in the steady, rhythmic scrape of the broom, the gentle click of her sewing needle, the way she met his assessing gaze without flinching. One afternoon, while changing the dressing on his chest, her fingers brushed against the uninjured skin of his shoulder. It was warm and solid, a map of hard muscle beneath the fevered surface. A strange, unexpected current passed through her, a brief awareness of him not as a patient, not as a burden, but as a man. She pulled her hand back quickly, her focus returning to the knot she was tying. But the moment lingered in the charged silence of the room, a silent acknowledgement that something was shifting between them, as subtle and inexorable as the turning of the earth. A wheat bled into two. The relentless heat of summer finally broke one afternoon under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The clouds gathered quickly, a dark, churning mass that swallowed the sun and plunged the world into a premature twilight. The wind came first, a low moan that rattled the loose planks of the shack and sent dust devils dancing across the yard. Then came the rain. It was not a gentle shower, but a violent, percussive deluge that hammered against the tin roof, each drop a gunshot in the sudden chaos. Nathaniel, who had been sleeping, was startled awake by a particularly loud clap of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the small building. He sat up with a grimace of pain, his hand flying to his bandaged chest. Lin Wei, who had been securing a rattling shutter, turned to him. In the flickering gloom, she saw a flash of something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not assessment, not pain, but a raw, unguarded vulnerability. The storm had stripped away his armor for a moment. She moved to his side, her presence a small pocket of calm in the roaring tempest. "It is only rain," she said, her voice soft but clear over the din. He looked at her, then around the small room as if seeing it for the first time. The roof was holding, but a few persistent drips had begun to fall near the stove, each one landing with a sizzle. The world outside was a churning wall of gray. They were trapped. Two strangers sealed in a box of wood and noise. The silence between them stretched, filled by the drumming of the rain. It was he who broke it, his voice still rough, but softer than she had ever heard it. "Was it green where you came from?" The question surprised her. It was the first thing he had asked that was not about his immediate needs. It was about her. She pictured the terraced hills of her home, a vibrant, impossible green that seemed a world away from this land of brown and ochre. "Yes," she whispered, the memory a sweet ache in her chest. "Very green, with a river that ran like liquid jade." She did not elaborate. She did not speak of the family that had sold her or the life she had lost. She gave him only the image, a small, perfect gift. He was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant. The storm raged on, a wild symphony of wind and water. He was stronger now. The fever had broken days ago, and color was slowly returning to his face. He could sit up for hours at a time, and yesterday he had taken a few unsteady steps across the room. She was no longer just his nurse. She was his companion in this enforced isolation. As the storm began to recede, leaving behind the clean, sharp scent of rain-soaked earth, he looked at her again. The assessment was gone from his eyes, replaced by something else, something she couldn't maim. It was a look of quiet respect, of a debt acknowledged. "Thank you," he said. The two words were simple, unadorned, but they landed in the quiet room with the weight of a solemn vow. In that moment, the space between them, once a chasm of circumstance and suspicion, had become a bridge. The days that followed the storm were different. A tangible tension had eased from the air inside the shack, replaced by a quiet, shared rhythm. Nathaniel was on his feet more now, his movements still stiff and careful, but gaining strength with each passing day. He began to take on small tasks, his pride refusing to allow him to remain an invalid any longer. He would split kindling for the stove, his motions economical and precise, or sit at the table, cleaning the old rifle that rested above the mantel, his hands moving with a familiar, practiced grace. He spoke more, though his words remained sparse. He would ask her about the plants she had found growing near the well, identifying the edible ones. He would point to a hawk circling high in the vast blue expanse and name it. He was teaching her the language of this place, this harsh, unforgiving land that was now her home. In return, she shared small pieces of herself. She taught him the name for the sun in her language, Taiyang, and the moon, yueliang. They were exchanges as simple and essential as the passing of bread and water, building a foundation of trust in the quiet spaces between words. One morning, as Lin Wei was returning from the well, her eyes caught a flicker of movement on the distant horizon. It was a rider, a dark speck moving slowly against the pale line where the earth met the sky. She paused, the heavy buckets pulling at her arms, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. There was no one else for miles. Any visitor was an event, and likely not a welcome one. She carried the water inside, her steps quicker than usual. Nathaniel was standing by the window, already watching. He had seen it too. His body was tense, his posture that of a man braced for a fight. He said nothing, but she saw him glance up at the rifle on the mantel. A cold dread, sharp and unfamiliar, washed over her. The piece they had carefully constructed felt fragile as a spider's web, and a rough wind was coming. He turned from the window, his gray eyes meeting hers. He didn't offer any explanation or false reassurance. He simply walked to the door and slid the heavy wooden bolt into place. The sound echoed in the small room, a definitive, final click. "Stay away from the window," he commanded, his voice low and flat. The rider disappeared behind a swell of the prairie, but the sense of being watched remained. The silence in the shack was no longer companionable. It was heavy, charged with a waiting dread. Nathaniel took the rifle down from the wall. He checked the load, his actions methodical and calm, but Lin Wei saw the faint tremor in his hand, a sign that his body had not yet fully recovered its strength. He was a wounded wolf, preparing to defend his den. And she, for the first time, felt a fierce, protective urge to stand with him. She was no longer just a nurse or a mail-order bride. She was part of this place, this fragile home, and she would not see it threatened. She moved to the stove and began to methodically stack the split firewood, her small, repetitive actions a silent vow of solidarity. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. They did not have to wait long. An hour later, the sound of hoofbeats grew from a distant murmur to a heavy, rhythmic drumming that vibrated through the packed earth floor. 3 riders crested the low rise in front of the shack and reined in their horses, kicking up a cloud of amber dust. Lin Wei, ignoring Nathaniel's order, peered through a small crack in the shutter. The man in the lead was broad and bearded, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. He wore a dusty black coat and a gun belt that hung low on his hips. He radiated a lazy, confident menace. "Blackwood!" the man shouted, his voice thick with contempt. "I know you're in there. We've come to collect what's owed." Nathaniel stood near the center of the room, the rifle held loosely in his hands, its barrel angled toward the floor. He did not move. He did not answer. His face was a mask of cold fury, his gray eyes fixed on the door. "Don't be like that," the man, Jasper Thorne, drawled. "We left you alive last time. A courtesy. One you don't seem to appreciate." He swung down from his horse, his spurs jingling with a sound that felt obscene in the tense silence. The other 2 men remained mounted, their hands resting near their pistols, their eyes scanning the dilapidated shack with open disdain. Thorne swaggered to the door and gave it a hard kick. The wood groaned, but the bolt held firm. "Come on out, Blackwood, or we'll burn this little shack down around you. I see you got yourself a new trinket." He gestured with his head toward the window where he must have glimpsed her. "A pretty little china doll. Don't you want her to see what a man you are?" Lin Wei felt a surge of cold anger. Trinket. Doll. He saw her as a possession, a thing. He saw this place as weak, its owner a broken man. He saw what Nathaniel had wanted the world to see, and he had fatally misjudged it. Nathaniel's voice, when he finally spoke, was dangerously quiet. "Get off my land, Thorne." A coarse laugh erupted from the man outside. "Your land? This scrap of dust? You've got nothing left, Blackwood. We made sure of that. Now open this door before I lose my patience." Instead of answering, Nathaniel looked at Lin Wei. He gave a short, sharp nod toward the back of the room. It was a clear order. Get down. Stay back. But Lin Wei did not move. She walked to the table, poured a cup of water from the bucket, and carried it to him. It was a simple, domestic act, but in that moment it was an act of defiance. She was not hiding. She was standing with him. Her hand was perfectly steady as she offered him the cup. He took it, his eyes holding hers for a fraction of a second, a silent communication passing between them. He understood. He took a slow sip, then set the cup down. He raised the rifle, the motion fluid and certain. The time for waiting was over. The world exploded in sound. Nathaniel did not wait for Thorne to make the next move. He fired, not at the door, but just beside it, the shot ripping through the thin plank wall with a deafening roar. Wood splintered outwards, and a yelp of surprise came from outside. It was a warning shot, a statement of intent. The lazy confidence of the outlaws evaporated in an instant. "You son of a—" Thorne's voice was cut off as another shot from inside sent him scrambling back toward his horse. The two mounted men drew their pistols, their shots thudding into the walls of the shack, filling the air with the smell of gunpowder and hot lead. Lin Wei dropped to the floor as Nathaniel had ordered, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could hear him moving, a swift, economical shuffle from the window to the door, never staying in one place for long. He was not a panicked rancher. He was a soldier. Another shot from his rifle, and one of the men outside cried out in pain, clutching his arm. The balance had shifted. They had expected a wounded man, an easy target. They found a formidable adversary, fighting with a cold, precise fury on his own ground. "Fall back!" Thorne bellowed, his voice tight with rage and surprise. He fired one last wild shot toward the shack before swinging onto his horse. "This isn't over, Blackwood. We'll be back for you." The sound of their galloping horses faded into the vast silence of the prairie. The immediate danger was gone, but the air in the room was still thick with its ghost. The ringing in Lin Wei's ears slowly subsided, replaced by the sound of Nathaniel's heavy breathing. She looked up. He was leaning against the wall, the rifle still in his grip, his face pale and beaded with sweat. A dark stain was spreading across the sleeve of his shirt, high on his left shoulder. A stray bullet had grazed him. Without a word, she rose and went to him. She took the heavy rifle from his hands and carefully leaned it against the wall. Then she gently took his arm, her touch firm and sure, and guided him to a chair. He sank into it, the fight draining out of him, leaving only a bone-deep weariness. She fetched the water basin and the clean cloths. This time, as she cut away the torn fabric of his shirt to reveal the bleeding furrow in his flesh, there was no hesitation, no barrier between them. She was not just tending to a wound. She was caring for her partner, the man who had stood between her and the brutal world outside. He watched her, his expression unreadable, as her small, deft hands cleaned the wound and bound it tightly. When she was finished, her hands lingered on his shoulder for a moment, a silent affirmation of all that had just passed between them. He did not pull away. He sat in the chair for a long time after she finished, the silence in the shack settling into a new shape. The violence had changed everything. It had burned away the last vestiges of their pretense, leaving only a raw and undeniable truth. He was not just a rancher. She was not just a bride. They were survivors, bound together by a shared trial by fire. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden fingers of light through the bullet holes that peppered the walls. Finally, Nathaniel stirred. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements slow but steady. He looked around the small, damaged room, at the splintered wood and the lingering haze of smoke. His gaze came to rest on Lin Wei, who stood watching him, her face calm in the fading light. A decision had been made. "Come," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "There is something you need to see." He didn't move toward the door that led out to the desolate yard. Instead, he walked to the back wall of the shack, a solid plank wall she had always assumed was the end of the structure. He pushed against a section of it, and to her astonishment it swung inward with a soft groan, revealing not the outside world but a dark, narrow passage. An earthy smell of cool stone and damp soil wafted out. He took a lantern from a hook, struck a match, and lit the wick. The flame cast a warm, flickering glow, pushing back the darkness. He held it up, his face half in shadow, and looked at her. It was not a command, but an invitation. A deep, instinctual trust bloomed in her chest, overriding any fear or hesitation. She had trusted him with her life. She would trust him with this. She followed him into the passage. The tunnel was short, cut through the earth and rock of the ridge itself. It ended at a heavy, iron-banded wooden door. Nathaniel slid a bolt, and the door swung open. They stepped out, not into the twilight, but into a world transformed. They were standing on a sheltered ledge halfway up the ridge. Below them, hidden from the vast, open prairie she had known, lay a valley. It was a secret, impossible paradise. A wide, clear river, a silver ribbon in the setting sun, snaked through lush green pastures dotted with hundreds of head of cattle, their dark hides like stones in a sea of green. On a gentle rise overlooking the river stood a house, not a shack, but a sprawling structure of thick, honey-colored stone and dark timber, solid as the mountain itself. Smoke curled from one of its great stone chimneys, a sign of life, of warmth, of home. Lin Wei stood frozen, speechless. The air here was cooler, sweeter, filled with the scent of water and grass and living things. The shack, the dust, the desolation. It was a facade, a gatehouse to this hidden world. It was a lie. She turned to look at him. His face, illuminated by the last rays of the sun cresting the western ridge, was etched with a profound weariness and something that looked like shame. "This is my land," he said, his voice low, his gaze fixed on the valley below. "All of it. Thorne and his kind, they see wealth, and they see only weakness to be preyed upon. They think a man with something to lose won't fight back." He paused, then finally turned his gray eyes to her. "I had to know," he confessed, the words raw and exposed. "I had to be sure that the person who came here, that they weren't the same, that they saw the man, not the money, that they could endure the hardship, because this life, protecting this, it is a hardship." She stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. The test, the poverty, the isolation. It wasn't a cruelty, it was a shield. He had hidden his fortune not to deceive her, but to find someone who could not be bought, someone whose character was forged in resilience, not comfort. He had been testing her for a partner, not a prize. A slow understanding dawned in her eyes. She looked from his earnest, searching face back to the magnificent valley, and then to the miserable shack clinging to the ridge above them. She had been sent to what she thought was a pauper's hut, a place of last resort, and in that place, stripped of everything, she had found not a master, but an equal. The wealth spread before her was staggering, a dream of security she could never have imagined. But it was not the land or the house or the cattle that held her. It was the man beside her, the man she had nursed, the man who had fought for her, the man who had trusted her with his truth. She gave a single slow nod. The gesture was small, but it held the weight of her entire journey, of her acceptance, of her choice. The lie did not matter. The truth did. They walked down the winding path from the ledge into the valley, the grass soft and cool beneath her worn shoes. The air grew richer with the smell of damp earth and river water as they descended. The scale of the place was immense, the stone house growing larger and more solid with every step. Lights were beginning to glow in its windows, warm yellow squares against the encroaching twilight. This was the true heart of Nathaniel Blackwood's world, a sanctuary built with sweat and stone and guarded by a fierce, hidden strength. They reached the wide porch of the house, and he paused, turning to face her. The last light of day painted the sky in shades of violet and rose behind him. His face was serious, all pretense gone, leaving only a quiet vulnerability. He did not touch her. He did not make grand pronouncements. He simply stood before her, offering her the truth of himself. The man in the shack, the wounded, broke rancher. "That is a part of me," he said, his voice steady. "The man who owns this valley is the other. I need a wife who knows and can live with both." He took a breath, his gaze holding hers. "This is my home, Linway. If you will have it, if you will have me." It was not a proposal born of convenience or contract. It was a question asked between two people who had seen the worst of their circumstances and the best of each other. It was an offer of a true partnership, forged not by a letter from across the sea, but in the dust and fear and quiet endurance of the past weeks. She thought of the long journey, the crushing disappointment, the difficult, hopeful days. She had come here expecting to be a servant, a possession. He was offering her a kingdom, and more importantly, he was offering her a choice. She looked up at him, at the man whose hidden depths mirrored the secret valley he protected. She saw the strength that had defied the outlaws, the patience that had watched her work, the trust that had led her here. "Yes," she said. The word was quiet, but it resonated in the still evening air, as solid and certain as the stone of the house at her back. A slow smile touched Nathaniel's lips, a true, warm smile that transformed his face, chasing away the last of the shadows. He reached out, and for the first time took her hand. His grasp was strong and warm, her small hand fitting perfectly in his. Together they turned and faced their home, a shared silence settling between them, more profound and promising than any words. The first star of evening pricked the darkening sky above the ridge, a single point of light in the vast, quiet peace of the valley.